Hello, welcome. Adam and Dan, welcome. It's a busy Wednesday. Welcome to the Saratoga Podcast.
Hello.
Do we have another city council hangover this morning?
Hey, why aren't our names appearing here?
Oh, okay. My apologies. There you go.
No, usually in our boxes, there's usually a title.
That's because I have a Chiron up.
You've got controls over everything here.
I mean, I line produce, I book the guests, how does she do it? I don't know. How do I do it?
You have 4 kids, apparently.
Allegedly. I've heard that. I've heard as much. We'll see if it's true. So big city council meeting last night. All 3 of us were actually there. And quite a bit was discussed. But one of the first things that jumped out at all 3 of us, I think, was the venue. For the first time in quite some time, they actually had the city council meeting in the original city council room on the first floor, which is really quite small. And intimate. So intimate is a very nice way to put it. I got there just before 7. It was standing room only. They had a monitor in the hallway. There was already a crowd of people standing in the hallway. If anyone's ever been in that room, especially when there's a lot of people in there, it gets really hot. It gets really cramped, and it holds a very small amount of people, maybe 40 on its best day. And so right off the bat, it was kind of confusing that they would have changed the venue from the very spacious and easy to accommodate people music hall on the 3rd floor to the tiny council room on the 1st floor. And there was a lot of people who were very unhappy about that.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a minute, because that came up often in public comment, and Mayor Kim, he did apologize for it. He said, I chose to hold the meeting here, but the reason he gave was a little suspect. I think he said that it was because the technology, the clarity, the optics for people watching at home is better in the smaller room, which to me doesn't really track. I don't know. You guys have watched on Zoom. Have you ever sat there and thought, boy, I wish I could see their faces more clearly?
The visual quality would be better, right?
Yeah. Something along those lines that again, that doesn't track with me. I think there's something else, but what could it possibly be?
The last thing I've ever thought is like, wow, I need a clearer picture of the city council's faces when I'm watching the meeting. I mean, that's literally, it's never crossed my mind.
That reminds me when Commissioner Moran was on he wasn't there. He was on Zoom on the screen behind, just
it was like from a movie or something.
Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
It did change the dynamic. I'll say that it felt a very different dynamic in that room last night, and maybe why it could have been. And I'm not supporting this. It was horrible. I didn't even, as you both know, I didn't even go inside the room. I stayed out in the hall because in a wall of heat. There was a seat or 2 for me, Adam. Thank you, but I said this room looks like a super spreader. I'm not going in there, and I stayed in a nice, cool hallway and watched it on TV. And but it did change the dynamic. I think. Maybe that's a reason why the meeting went without craziness as some of the previous ones have.
I have a theory, and my theory is that in the city council room, you have like an actual wooden divider that divides where the public is sitting from where the city council sits. And so you can't just walk up and, storm the city council table like you can in the music hall, which is what happened at the last meeting. But the reason this was brought up in particular was Kristen Dart, was at public comment, and she commented about this because her grandfather, Lieutenant Colonel Clarence W. Dart, was being honored with a proclamation that night, and her family was there. And her family was all out in the hall standing because they did not have seats in the city council room on a night that was so significant for them, when they should have had a front row reserved for the family, so they could receive this proclamation and a flag, and it could be read. And the fact that the room was full of white people in particular, and her family is African-American, and they're all standing outside in the hall. I mean, it was really appalling. And she articulated it, just perfectly. But it was really glaring. And it was not a good note to start the meeting on.
Yeah. The optics were bad. I will say that, and this was noted that there were multiple people once this was said who offered to give the family a seat, and I thought that was very good. But yeah, at best, optics were horrible. At worst, it was bad, real bad. But they did come inside, and the meeting kicked off.
The meeting kicked off. Public comment, I will say, was a bit tamer, which was good. Although we know that just before the city council meeting yesterday, word leaked out. I personally saw this news on social media first, that Els and the other woman who was at the last meeting, who was a bit disruptive with Els, were both being charged with, I'm not sure we knew what the specific charges were yesterday, but they were both being charged with something as it pertained to their behavior at the last city council meeting.
Bridget Barr is who you're referring to.
Bridget, thank you. So Bridget and Els were both going to be charged with something pertaining to the last city council meeting. So that now makes 3 people, Chandler, Els, and Bridget, all of whom are going to be in court on some kind of charge having to do with disrupting an official proceeding, would be my guess. And so there were several people, who spoke out on that issue in particular. There were also people there who were speaking out on one of the other agenda items pertaining to.
Well, hold on, Rob. Let's talk about that for one moment. Let's not skip over that. Because there was a lot of accusations that information was leaked to the Facebook group Moving Saratoga Forward, which, as we could all know, is a right-leaning Facebook blog. But the question is, was that leaked or was that public knowledge? And Robin, we talked about this, and you have an app, right? Or you set it up with the court system where you get alerts for certain activity, not necessarily Els, but other people.
Yes.
If there's information about them in the court system, correct? So
actually, Dan was the one, you actually alerted me to the fact that this existed, because I wanted to know what was going on with the Daryl Mount case. And so I signed up for something where if there's any motion or anything happens in the Daryl Mount case, I get some kind of legal alert saying that there's been some movement or some change in that case. And do you know what I'm talking about, Dan? It's not super.
I get the same thing. It's often not helpful. It's often hard to decipher, but something happened and you really got to dig to find out what exactly happened. But yes, I know what you're talking about.
Well, I don't have that for anybody else, but my guess is that's how Moving Saratoga Forward found out, because I cannot imagine ever James Montenegro calling the Moving Saratoga Forward Facebook page, for starters, because I'm not sure James Montenegro knows about social media or that the Facebook even exists. But also the author or authors of Moving Saratoga Forward hate James Montenegro. I mean, they are vicious about how they, talk about him, depict him, etc. And so I just can't imagine the circumstance in which those two are leaking information to each other. To me, that doesn't make logical sense. But I don't have any particular insight. I don't have any special or inside information. I'm just speculating here.
There's nothing, sorry to interrupt you, Robin. There's nothing automatic about that, because that's a kind of low-level criminal case that just begun, whereas the Daryl Mount civil case is in the higher courts, and it's been ongoing for multiple years now. So the higher courts on the civil cases have a mechanism where anyone can sign up and follow it. But that one just began, so I don't know how he found out about it either. But obviously he beat the local press, everybody, by almost a full day by knowing about it.
But if it had started, it would be public knowledge, and you could call the courts and get that information. I just think we can all agree that if whatever happened, I mean, Jim was accused of conspiring with this Facebook group. I think we can say that most likely was not the scenario.
I just think that Jim loves going to a newspaper. I mean, he's the first person to call up the Times-Union, the Daily Gazette, to speculate about anything. I mean, we've seen him do that for the last year and a half consistently. So I've never observed Jim using social media ever to leak or speculate about something. So I think it's unlikely, but I don't really know. I don't know. They also did say that Els found out through Facebook, which, if that's the case, is really, really shitty. I can't imagine finding out I was being charged with something via a Facebook page. That would be really shitty.
Did you notice that the noteworthy difference this time? Jim was not the complainant. The police department, some police officer was a complainant. Jim was a witness, which is the way it should have been done.
I did notice that. Yeah. Well, Jim probably is thinking, I don't want to pay for any more legal bills, so let's do this right this time around.
Yes.
Yes. So anyway, that was largely talked about during public comment. And then also this no-knock warrant, which was on the mayor's agenda last night, was one of the other topics of conversation. Dan, did you want to talk about the no-knock warrants and kind of like what was on the agenda last night and how it kind of panned out?
Sure. I'll give the slightest bit of background from my police academy days 38 years ago or 36 years ago, because I never was involved with a no-knock warrant. But most search warrants are what I would call a standard search warrant, where you knock and announce. However, there is a function in the criminal procedure law where you can request the no-knock warrant. Obviously, in the law, it's not worded that way, but where they can just pound the door down and go in because they're worried that there's people with guns on the other side that
Dan,
they're going to shoot police officers or something.
Dan, you skipped out. You request this no-knock warrant from a judge, correct?
From a judge,
I think
correct.
That's a very important aspect of a no-knock warrant. That
Yes.
it's not the police. The police department determines if there's a need, but they're not the ones who determine if it's going to happen, correct?
Everything with a warrant is signed by a judge, all aspects of it. And the judge will determine whether it's a legitimate request, and he may grant a no-knock warrant. They don't happen often, and sometimes things go right, and you catch the criminals off guard, and nobody gets hurt. Sometimes they go wrong, but I don't know if that's necessarily because of the no-knock aspect of it. There might have been violence regardless of how the police entered. But in any event, so that is how that works. But they're very controversial, and there's an alleged racial component to it, and a lot of states, municipalities, and so forth have gotten away from them for the most part. But from a police perspective, there are times, and they're rare, but there are times when a no-knock warrant is not only appropriate but absolutely necessary for the safety of the police officers. Because if you've got think of the Waco, think of the cult in Waco. Yeah. Imagine if you're going to knock on that door. I mean, it went awry even with the no knock, because they knew they were coming. They were ready.
When you tell someone like, "Hey, you have a cache of weapons. FYI, we're going to be there in half an hour."
Yeah, make sure you're fully loaded your clips. Okay. Yeah, exactly. So there are times where the police really do need a no knock warrant. Now, it should be rare. It shouldn't be abused, but there are times, and so that kind of sets the table for what you're talking about, Robin. I'll kick it back to you if that makes sense.
Well, and that being said, I will say that statistically, it does seem that it's not really an alleged racial component. It does seem that there's like a statistically proven racial component nationally. This was a hotly debated topic during the police collaborative, which was a 9-month collaborative with volunteers in Saratoga who were appointed to a group to reimagine policing in Saratoga. And it was one of the most controversial issues that was discussed, that along with the Civilian Review Board. And so they spent a lot of time and energy going over, how they were going to kind of resolve their differences as a group and what they were going to recommend in terms of no-knock warrants. So there was a lot of data, there was a lot of discussion, there was a lot of opinion, there was a lot of emotion. At the end of the day, what was proposed last night, as far as I understand it, was essentially kind of what we already have, which is no-knock warrants are not to be used except for in the most extreme of circumstances. Am I missing something?
No, that's correct. Although none of us, at least as of this morning, could access the amended resolution. We can only see the old resolution, which was truly a ban. And this was appropriately dialed back just enough. And you're right. It sounds almost like a restatement of the law of, what's the difference, but good for them. The art of compromise, even if it's a little bit of I'm glad there was a compromise ultimately. I wish we could read the resolution. Maybe it's up on the City Hall website somewhere now, but it certainly wasn't last night. And I wish there were at least printed copies that were available. Maybe there were, but I didn't see any.
I'm looking now, and the problem is they don't tell you if there's no date or timestamp on here. So I don't know if I'm looking at the old one or the new one. But I know one of the iterations of this had it such that if we needed a no-knock warrant, we could apply for one, but then the sheriff's department or the state police had to execute it. And that I thought was an ill-conceived idea. So I think they landed in a much better place. Although I still think it seems duplicative a bit of what we already have. So I'm glad that the folks who were looking for a win here and wanting to see some action, some movement with these 50 points felt they had a victory. But when I read the language and heard the language last night, it did seem like what we already had in place as a policy. And then I also was a little confused by the fact that I did not think that the mayor's department could put an agenda item on their agenda that in effect would change the policy of someone else's department. And I know that's kind of a charter procedural kind of boring issue, but I just didn't think that was something that could be done.
Yeah, and Jim being the only dissenting vote, or Commissioner Montanino, pardon me, he made that point of this, this could infringe on the charter and the responsibilities of the Commissioner of Public Safety, which Mayor Kim, argued with, and ultimately it was passed. I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts on no-knock warrants? I mean, my thought is no-knock warrants are there. You're making the best of the worst situation, right? There's no easy solution. And the people I think that really should bear the responsibility are the criminals for, because they're the ones who put society and the police in those positions. And, you see sometimes there's horrible results, like with Breonna Taylor, a young lady who was shot and killed in her house when the police had a no-knock warrant at the wrong address. That's horrible. But it has to be balanced with the police safety and the overall ability to execute and safely execute warrants by police officers. And I think that the fact that a judge, this is not the police who determine it, that a judge determines if a no-knock warrant is legitimate or not. I think they absolutely should be, that we should constantly be looking at them, refining them, making them better. But it's a very bad and very dangerous precedent to do away with them altogether. Dan, you'd probably agree with me, right?
Yeah, it would be a bad precedent. And the flip side of that is if we're using them too often, as some departments have, and you mentioned Robin, and when I use the word alleged, I wasn't casting discredit on that. I just haven't looked into it myself. I don't know the facts on no-knock warrants and race, but I have heard it secondhand that there is a disparity there. So, Adam, I do agree. But Jim Montanino, Commissioner Montanino mentioned, I think, the last one we did in the city was 7 years ago, and that's appropriate. If you're doing them twice a year, something's wrong, right?
So here's the deal. I actually know a lot about this subject simply because I've listened to all the police collaborative meetings, but also I've watched a lot of documentaries and shows that focused on this topic in particular. And throughout the country, I think no-knock warrants are a serious, serious problem, especially when you're looking at sheriff's departments. They are used with reckless abandon and really, it's so hard because we're looking at our city, and yes, in the last 7 years, there's only been one no-knock warrant that we've executed. Even though there have been times when judges have issued no-knock warrants, but we've chosen to go in, with a regular warrant. So we look at, our city, our police department, our judges, and we think that they're being used very responsibly. But then you look at other parts of the country and it is the polar opposite. And people are getting killed. People are getting shot. They're going into the wrong house, the wrong address. They're being used totally irresponsibly. And so then you see states like Florida. Florida has banned no-knock warrants. I mean, that was shocking to me. But that tells you that there are places where there's departments that are using them incredibly irresponsibly. And so I think it's very difficult to talk about them in this kind of totality. And while right now I feel very comfortable with our policy on no-knock warrants, 20 years from now, I don't know what kind of department we're going to have. I don't know what kind of judges we're going to have, and I might feel differently. So I think erring on the side of caution and using the language we have in place right now is the best approach. So anyway, that's my feeling.
This may change anyway at the state level. This may be a moot point by the time the legislative session is over in June.
But that being said, when people and there were people on the police collaborative who 100% felt that there was no instance in which a no-knock warrant would be a safer approach. And that I cannot get my head around, because I can think of a dozen examples in which it would absolutely, without question, be the safer approach. I mean, I can't get past that reasoning of there's no instance in which a no-knock warrant would not be a safer approach. Like I can't get past that. I find that very confusing because I think there's a lot of really easy, logical examples, like the one you just used of Waco, or if you're going into a known drug dealer's house with another huge weapons cache, or if you're going, we've had instances here where there's been someone who's going through a mental, issue and is suicidal and has guns and is going to shoot anyone who comes in the house. And I mean, there's a lot of instances in which I think you can logically understand that it would be safer for all parties to have a no-knock warrant. So
yeah, let me kind of correct something you did, because Florida, and that was brought up today, that Florida banned no-knock warrants. That's not true.
That wasn't true?
It was not true. No, I'll read what a quick paragraph on Florida and the no-knock warrants. They're still able to execute a search warrant without knocking on the door. However, one of the following exceptions must apply. The person inside the home already knows police are there with a search warrant. Police reasonably believe a person inside the home is in imminent peril of bodily harm. If the danger to the police officer would be increased by knocking on the residence and stating his purpose for being there, or people inside the residence are engaged in activities leading to police believe they are attempting to escape or destroy evidence.
What?
Yeah.
So
that's pretty much.
Last night, there was a list of states where it just said no-knock warrants were banned in these states, and that's where I was getting this.
Yeah,
so
I know.
That was very misleading.
Yes. That and again, that's the problem, is that are the people who speak at city council meetings and even some of our council members really spin facts to fit their narrative.
Been like 15 asterisks on that.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. It's kind of like what we have. That's not. They didn't just say, "Wait, these aren't illegal at all." It's essentially saying there's got to be a good reason, and that sounds very reasonable to me. Those 4 points of why police can the evidence one, I think, might be a little iffy because if you're afraid somebody's gonna flush, I would use marijuana. I don't know what the equivalent. I don't know, marijuana is legal, but a really low
cocaine or something, or heroin.
Well, cocaine's I don't know what class narcotic. Cocaine's not it's like a level.
Cocaine's definitely a narcotic. It just depends on the amount.
Crack
all of them can be.
Yeah, I'm just saying a very low level. Like if somebody's flushing an eighth of weed,
you're right.
You wouldn't want.
That's not a safety issue. That's just trying to get the prosecution. I understand evidence. Your point.
Yeah, and I think there's room. I think that's something we should look at, but again, not a total ban. It's just, and I think a lot of the council members took it as an opportunity to virtue signal, about how progressive they were, and stating off facts of these no-knock warrants. Again, some facts that aren't really facts or twisted facts. It kind of takes away from the actual conversation we should be having. But I guess at the end of the day, we can all agree on the resolution. Yeah. We think that was passed, that we think we can agree with it based on what we think it is.
Folks, feel free to comment, by the way, for those of you watching live.
It does feel like a political season is coming on, though. You can tell that elections are coming up a little bit. I'm sensing it in some of the comments in the subject matter at the city council table. So kind of a hard left turn here. But one of the other things that came up last night were the fees that go along with the many, many special events that happen in Saratoga Springs. And what I mean by that is we have so many events, from, runs to Chowderfest to New Year's Eve events. And every time we have one of those events, they require extra police for security and safety, as well as extra firefighters for EMS, ambulance services, et cetera. And that requires police officers and firefighters. And so when you're proposing to do an event with a city, you fill out an application, you send it off to City Hall, and you get an estimate of how much that cost is going to be, because the organization throwing the event is responsible for that expense. Well, there's been kind of a shift in how the current city council would like to do things. And they would like to not be charging those organizations these kind of extra fees to be throwing these events. And so Todd Shimkus was there last night, and Daryl Legere was there last night, and they were talking about the burden that these fees are causing events like New Year's Eve and 4th of July, et cetera, and how they really need to get some kind of standard kind of fixed rate in place, or some kind of solution so that it's not so financially taxing on the events. Because all these events bring in revenue, they bring in tourists, and they're really at the lifeblood of the city and our tourism. And so I'm curious what you guys think about that. I have some somewhat strong opinions on it, but wanted to see what you guys thought.
Well, Adam, you want to go?
Yeah, sure. So my thought is, we have our family has a hotel downtown. Events are great for us. I like the idea of kind of making it as easy as possible and as financially easy as possible for people to have events. With that being said, I don't like the fact of how they were picking what events to waive the fees for. Commissioner Moran, made the point of, and there were solid points that when you're charging these charitable organizations, you're taking money away from the kids who need it, or the people who need that money. The issue I have with that is that as a municipality, it gets very gray when we start using taxpayer dollars to fund brain research. Now I'm talking about the Team Billy Ride and Walk for research. It was about a young man, Billy Gray, who is a boy who passed away from, I believe, brain cancer. A great cause. I know the family. It's a great family. They need every penny and they deserve every penny. But how do you balance that with a municipality deciding what organizations should receive the funding and whatnot? So personally, I'm for waiving the fees. We'd have to find a way to make it up, but I think that waiving fees encourages a lot of these special events that make Saratoga special. Dan?
Yeah, Adam, thanks. Yeah, and here's the point. You touched on it, Adam. If the event organizers aren't paying the fees, then the fees are still there. The taxpayers are picking them up. So that's a burden shift. And that doesn't mean I'm against it. I maybe this needs a longer discussion, even a committee or a task force, which makes people say, "Oh my God, it won't go anywhere." But no, there are things that come out of this. Maybe there's a way, and it should be across the board, whatever it is. Maybe the city picks up the first portion of it, and the event pays above and beyond, because there is a value to the city to have these events. There is a value to the businesses. It does bring in tax revenue and so forth. So I'm not saying no, but a balanced, even-handed across the board approach that to me should apply to all of them, not a complete shift to the taxpayers. That I would be against.
Well, I obviously have a lot to say on this, but I've been on several committees for nonprofit events. I've been on the Cantina Kids Fun Run committee for years. Every event that you throw for a nonprofit has fixed costs, and you have to fundraise to get sponsors and to offset those fixed costs. And so, the cost that you're paying the city for police and fire is just another thing that you have to get sponsorships for to offset. There's always costs to offset. So it's not that this is like the one expense that these nonprofits are having to pay for that are taking away from whatever they're netting at the end of the day. But my concern is that, I don't have the exact number, but it's like 60, 70, 80 events that we host throughout the year. And, from, smaller runs of 100, 200, 300 people to events like Chowderfest that are 30,000 people almost come here. And I think that you have to do for one what you do for all. And so I think the only approach to me that makes sense is to have something that's like per scale. Like if you're having an event between 1 and 1,000 people, this is the fixed price. If it's 1,000 to 2,000 people, it's this. And maybe that makes sense. And it could be a lower cost than paying the full overtime cost that, the events are picking up right now. But I do think it's a little bit dicey. And then, with a chamber, it's always been a little bit tricky because they originally had always footed the bill for the fireworks on 4th of July, for as an example. But then they started soliciting, individuals to start donating for the 4th of July fireworks. I know I donated some years. I know some years Sonny Bonaccio stepped up and decided to sponsor them. They tried a new kind of formula for this year's New Year's Eve. I think it went really, really well. People were super happy with it. But Todd Shimkus had said he really wants to bring back all the events that were kind of canceled, like the Hats Off weekend, the 4th of July events. Sorry, my lighting keeps going in and out here. Sorry about that, guys. Because I don't know if you guys have noticed, but we haven't had any 4th of July parades or fireworks or anything for a couple of years now, which I think is a bummer for our all-American city. And I think these things do need to come back. And I think there is a real question of who foots the bill. But at the end of the day, we have a limited line for overtime for fire and police. And I don't think the city can just absorb this cost. It's going to be really, really, really significant if you absorb it for all these events. So I think it's tricky, but some kind of compromise has to be worked out.
Yeah, it would be good if they gave a number, right? About, all right, this is what we collected, this is what we charge, this is what and kick it to Commissioner Shangvi and see if where we can find the money to do it. But I unlike you guys, I believe, and this was brought up too on the state level, that essentially you're shifting the bill to the taxpayers, but the taxpayers are the ones who pay for the police.
Yes.
That is part of our society, is that we have police forces that are funded by taxpayers, and so to kind of pigeonhole and say, all right, this certain thing has to pay for police separately outside of the taxes they pay. I don't agree with that. I think there's other ways to find the money to pay for these events, as opposed to charging the event organizers.
But I just mean it'll nuke the overtime line. But maybe if there's a separate line in finance or somewhere else in a different, you know what I mean, that covers the special event costs. That's kind of what I meant. Yeah,
it would definitely shift money from buckets in the budget, and that's why I would have liked to seen a number about, all right, what is the cost to the taxpayers, and how are we going to pay for this? If this is a loss of revenue, where are we going to make it up? But that wasn't given. It was hey, let's just start waiving fees. And I agree with the intention. I think that we had more thorough public discussion and talk about what's the meat and potatoes behind this waiving of the fees.
Well, and I think at one point, didn't Commissioner Songby said there was maybe $151,000 in unassigned fund balance? It came up when actually they were talking about my legal fees for the Attorney General. She was talking about, maybe I'm making this up, but basically,
yeah, she did. I'm just trying to recall exactly what she said. I don't recall the number, but yeah, there's got to be some bucket somewhere if we're gonna do this, that we pull the money from.
And my point is that $150,000 would be nowhere near enough to cover the overtime for the events we do all year round. Nowhere.
And if these are freebies, 70 or 80 will be 90. Because since COVID has subsided somewhat, we've got the Silks and Satins 5K came back, New Year's Eve came back. There's going to be new ones. It's going to be Saratoga is insanely popular, right? These are going to go up and up and up. There has to be
they can still charge fees, right? So there's still fees for garbage cleanup per se. The DPW can charge the fees, and nobody was talking about waiving those. So there are still some fees. They're not there. There is still some. There is still some deductible, if you will.
DPW is still raking it in. Good for them.
Yeah, exactly.
But beyond money, can the city, the police force, and the other entities within the city, can they handle all this?
I don't
going
know.
on through a crazy summer?
I do not. That is a really good question, because our police department is in bad shape in terms of staffing levels. Bad shape. And we're going to go into another really, really busy summer with the track here. And I don't know how they're going to be able to handle, doing Sunday and Saturday morning runs, closing off downtown, then going right into the track. I mean, it's going to be a lot on a lot of young officers. And like Jim has said, we don't want our officers working 12, 18-hour shifts. I mean, that is not a good and healthy way for your officers to be working. They'll be burned out by July 1st.
Exactly.
Is there any? Is there? And I got that to subject matter experts. Airline pilots or truckers. They have a finite. You can only work so many hours in a given amount of time. Is there anything like that with police?
I
sometimes in the contracts. Oh, sorry, Robin, go ahead. But hey, I've worked a 25-hour shift before, and any cop probably has as well. When the emergency's there and there's nobody to relieve you, you're stuck there. Yeah. Sometimes it's scheduled. It can be abusive, and you're right, it is dangerous. I fell asleep in the middle of an intersection once at 6 a.m. Just drove right through the intersection, almost got T-boned. I was exhausted.
I was on a ride along, and we responded to a call of a guy who had fallen asleep, literally pulling out of Skidmore in the middle of the intersection. He was dead asleep in his car at midnight on a Saturday.
A police officer?
No, it was just like a 20-something-year-old kid. We thought the kid was dead. We thought he had OD'd in his car. He'd just fallen asleep in the middle of an intersection. Anyway, weird
You need
story.
a nap. You need a nap.
What's that?
So when you need a nap, you need a nap.
I mean, and again, of course, our police department handled it like perfectly because he passed, the sobriety test and everything, but he'd fallen asleep in the middle of an intersection. So they parked his car a little ways down the street, and then we drove him to work, and they handled it like the pros that they are.
Yeah.
But
Coffee.
good question, Adam.
Yeah. All right.
So what else? So there was so much on this agenda, you guys. It's so hard to go through these things because, I mean, when you count up the number of things, there's probably, and I wish we had time to go through everything, but there's probably 50 things on this agenda. One of the things that is a little personal to me that I just wanted to gripe about for like 30 seconds, you guys, is that for the millionth time, Ron Kim had on his agenda the legal fees that the city is paying for my attorney to that's representing me in the Attorney General investigation into possible civil rights violations. And I just have to say something about this because he put it on the agenda again. And he said that there was like a $6,000 increase or something that they had to cover in bills. The bill has been $15,000 since October for my attorney. It has not increased by 1 penny since October. And so I do not understand why he continues to put it on the agenda and make it seem as if there have been more billable hours or more money has been spent when not another dime has been spent since October. And I have to just surmise that the only reason this keeps happening is because it's a great way for him, who he really does not care for me, as we all know, to just kind of like put it back out there in the public and remind everybody that this is going on and kind of just shame me a little bit because
I was going to say, I think the kids would call that throwing shade on you, right?
Yes.
It's just keeps throwing shade on you. But
I know. And I'm like standing in the hallway listening to this and some girl walked out and she was like, what'd she say? She was like,
I was there when that happened.
Yeah. What'd she say? She was like,
something like, you got your money or something. And you're
like,
I don't need money. That hasn't
she's
changed
like,
since
happy for you,
October.
you got your money. And I'm like, I didn't. Oh God, it's so frustrating. It makes me want to scream.
John Kaufman, the blogger, accused Ron of weaponizing transparency, and that was regarding this issue. And I sort of see it. There's times I disagree with John, and there's times when he's, when he's dead on, and it seemed like it was something legitimate.
Put up the bills, Ron. Like show the bills. The bill has not changed since October.
And this isn't for your benefit necessarily. Yeah, you're the one that's being represented, but you're indemnified. So anything would come from the city. So it protects the city, and it's required by law. And we've talked about this before. So it should be a non-issue at this point, at least the payments.
He is completely weaponizing it because he knows I am, involved in his opponent's campaign, and he doesn't like me very much, and I think this is his favorite way to remind me of that. But
Jason Gold said they were reasonable fees. A very experienced corporate attorney said these are very reasonable fees.
Well, I appreciate that, and I also appreciate the fact that, how are we supposed to know where this investigation is going to go, or how much money it's going to cost? It's impossible. How would you ever know that?
Yeah.
Oops, sorry, I lost you guys for a sec. Sorry, I'm back. Anyhow, that was my own.
That actually, something I want to talk about with this is, as far as the Attorney General, that is used, by the activists a lot to discredit our police department. Is that they're under, and it's also used to create the, sometimes as an excuse to create the chaos in the city hall meetings. At what point is does the Attorney General have to get involved? You can't use that as an excuse to do whatever you want, right? That I'm going to disrupt this meeting because the police force is racist because they're under they're under an investigation by the Attorney General. What is appropriate? And there's some forms of civil disobedience that I think we all can agree are inappropriate. But where do those lines fall? And at what point, when you have people, again, going past barriers, approaching city council, acting in a threatening manner to people who are making public comment, at what point does the Attorney General have to say, listen, you can't use this investigation to do whatever you want. And have we reached that point? And is this something that you guys think would ever happen or be valuable?
It does feel like it's thrown out as like a threat. Like, if you do that, you're going to be looped into this investigation, so you better not act that way. Which, is probably not the best way to use an attorney general investigation unless you're actually the AG. But I don't know. I mean, these are all new murky waters for me. I mean, all I know on my end is that it's been really personally challenging because it's an investigation. There's no charges. They're sorting through information. I have heard nothing from the AG's office since October. All I know is that I've turned over every little bit of information I have. And it's been challenging to hear it brought up again and again and again, as if there's already been a decision and, I'm guilty as charged.
These investigations, unfortunately, sometimes take years. And sometimes that is helpful to community. Sometimes it's not. Oftentimes it's not. Part of me as a citizen wants to say to the Attorney General, hey, lay it out. What are your conclusions? What is your proof? Be done with this. This should not take 3 years.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, how big is her office? Because of all the things happening in New York State, I cannot imagine this is like high on the priority list. So unless she's got like the most massive staff ever, I can see why this is going to take some time.
They're overwhelmed, a lot of their staff. There's a big state, a lot of people, a lot of issues.
Yeah. And so, but I agree. I mean, it's how the Darryl Mount case has dragged on for so long. I think that's been really damaging to the community, that civil suit has just continues to drag on and on and on, and there's no resolve. And I see this kind of happening in the same way, it's not good for anyone. We all need to heal in our own ways. And for this to continue, with no end in sight is, it doesn't give me a whole lot of hope. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's a big cloud over the city and you, Robin, but you know what? It's unfortunate, but it's the facts.
It is. And I know what's in my heart. I know what I did, and so I can be comfortable with that, and it'll shake out the way it shakes out.
All right.
Yeah. So one thing I just wanted to bring up that I think is, as I keep reading about it, is so just unbelievably tragic, is the young woman who was lost and pulled in to the wrong driveway and was shot and killed by the man who lived at the house that she pulled into to turn around at. I'm sure. Have you both read this story?
It's in our backyard, right? The poor woman from Schuylerville. This is so horrible, Robin. The man, and I'm using the word man inappropriately because he's an awful creature. The picture of him, and if I send it to you real quick, Robin, I don't even want it. The anger, you could still see the anger in his face after this horrible event. He had no look of, what did I do? It still would think he was angry.
And how many times have you turned? Like, I've turned around 1,000,000 times in someone's driveway because, you're like, it's the only way. You pull in, you're like, I'm lost. You just pull in really quick and then you back out. I've done it 1,000,000 times. And for this to happen, to end this young woman's life this way it just really got me. It just is just a terrible tragedy.
Yeah. Unfortunately, this comes back to our country's inability to pass any meaningful gun control laws. It's happened. It's just happened 3 times, something like this. You had 2 cheerleaders in Texas who got in the wrong car and were shot.
The 16-year-old who was going to pick up his little brother and rang the wrong doorbell and was shot. I also think, though, this has a lot to do with the Republicans really fear-mongering and making this threat of fear and afraid. We have to be afraid of everything. You've got to have your guns because there's this rogue, this threat out there. So you've got to be armed and ready for it. I mean, I really do think that culturally that has to have something to do with this kind of atmosphere that we're in, where someone could pull into your driveway or a 16-year-old kid could just ring your doorbell and you're going to shoot him through the glass of your door in his head just for ringing the goddamn doorbell.
Yeah.
I-
Shoot him twice.
We should mention the victim's name. Kaylin Gillis is the victim's name from Schuylerville, who was just barely 20 years old, had her whole life ahead of her. Wonderful tributes online as in the newspapers I read about her, and she's gone. And the people in that car that evening had to try to. They couldn't even get a cell phone service. They had to drive apparently to be able to call. I mean, Adam, I'm not sure if laws would have made a difference here. This was a 12 gauge shotgun. I don't know the assailant's, the alleged assailant's record or anything, but he might have been able to legally possess that gun as a hunting shotgun. It was a shotgun slug that killed Ms. Gillis.
So it was a slug that was a round that was fired.
A 12 gauge slug that you would, a deer slug basically.
Dan, what's the deal though with someone's what's the law of someone's on your property or in your house?
Your house is a different story. Your driveway, you have absolutely no. You think of the old Western movies. Remember, somebody would open the door and they'd have their gun lined up and they'd have the trigger. But you can't protect property with deadly physical force.
Right.
So this is the charges certainly look appropriate to me. It's now if somebody's in your house, there's a different story. There's no in New York. There have been plenty of shootings. That's a different story. Then your life is in danger. Yeah. Generally, the law allows with certain limitations deadly physical force, but not your driveway. No.
Yeah. And in a
Dan,
car,
does New York have any? Now, you look what happened in Kansas City. It was a little different. The young man was on the porch. Again, it's completely tragic. It should never have happened. The guy who did it should go to jail for a long time. But they have a stand your ground law, which could make prosecution. It could make prosecution slightly difficult. Does New York have a stand your ground law?
Inside the house. And you know what? I've been out of this world I'm not a police officer anymore. Although I'm an attorney, I don't really touch criminal law. So it was years ago, it may have changed, but years ago, within your house, you did not have a duty to retreat. And there was at least one case in Buffalo years back where a man shot a drunk kid who tragic because the kid was just drunk and he ended up in the guy's kitchen and the guy shot him.
So that literally happened to me here. I fell asleep in my living room. This was about 3 years ago. And I woke up to someone coming from my second floor, walking down the stairs of my second floor. Thought it was my husband, woke up, was confused, followed him into the kitchen where he turned around. And I realized it was a stranger who'd been at my second floor where all my kids were sleeping. And it was it was one of the scariest moments of my life. And I realized then that I'm kind of a duck and run person because I just immediately ran upstairs and called 911 and wanted to make sure my family was basically alive upstairs. And a lot of people asked me, did you have a gun? They wanted to know if I had a gun and would have shot him in that moment. And all I could think about, to be honest with you, is had I had a gun and shot that person in my house in that moment, what an utter tragedy that would have been for him, for his family, for my family, for all parties involved. I don't know. I just can't imagine. These are all
the way it works is usually it's an accidental shooting of a family member. They thought it was a burglar and it was the brother. That happens so often. You just don't hear about it as much anymore. That happens so often. The flip side of that is there are some times when people are in your house and they are terrible, vicious criminals that will harm and kill you. There is that element. I'm not going to say that doesn't exist as well, or even try to downplay that. But it's complicated. When you're dealing with deadly physical force, it's complicated, and there's oftentimes no second chances.
Yeah, and this guy was yelling very forcefully at me, but I think was on drugs and drunk, and
Dan, to get back to your point though about the gun laws and what this guy could have legally owned that shotgun, maybe, and I don't like when we base policy on one incident, right? So like with these school SROs, which we're all pro, that's not going to solve every mass shooting in a school, but we have these 3 incidents that just this week of people being killed for going into the wrong car or house. maybe would have stopped one, right? Maybe one of these. Well, thank goodness the boy from Kansas City or the young man from Kansas City survived. But maybe he would have stopped one of these shootings. Maybe one of these people would not have had a gun, and that's why I think it becomes worth it. I agree.
I agree with you generally. The gun laws
Yeah.
in this country need to be absolutely addressed. But I'm just saying, in this particular case in Hebron, over Washington County, I don't know. It's possible. It's possible that he was a convicted felon and shouldn't have had the gun. I don't know that.
It's so upsetting because nationally, I hate to say I've done the research, but I've seen all the polls nationally. Nationally, gun owners are it's like 70% of gun owners are all in favor of background checks, red flag, the kind of like basic
common sense regulation.
Common sense. Yeah, they're all in favor of it. But it's gotten so hyper political, and it's gotten so, red states versus blue states, and the NRA gets involved. And I think that, in Florida, what happened in Florida, that you can carry a concealed weapon with nothing. You can just go buy one and carry a concealed weapon wherever you want. Doesn't matter who you are or why you want to buy it, or if you have any experience, training, whatever. The majority of gun owners in Florida do not support that. And so I think the hyper politicalization of gun laws right now is really doing a lot of harm to our country. And it's not something that actually the people in our country are in favor of. It's just the politicians playing really nasty politics.
It's a very effective lobby. Unfortunately.
A lot NRA and fucking Ron DeSantis. Sorry. Cursing. Apologies. Anyway.
Sorry. Yeah, we were going.
I know.
We had some other issues. Are we going to talk school board at all?
Yes. I think we should talk school board. I am embarrassed to say I do not know the date of the actual school board election. Adam, do you know?
I do. Why don't if you guys start, I'll pull it up.
I want to say May 18th.
May 18th.
Whatever Tuesday.
I am actually pathetically uninformed in terms of how many seats are open, who's running again. I need a little recap. I don't know if either one of you are up on it. I do know I signed a petition for a woman named Sharon.
It's May 16th. Tuesday, May 16th is the election. So it's coming up.
16th, okay.
Okay, Tuesday, May 16th.
Yeah, that's 4 weeks. 4 weeks from yesterday, basically.
Obviously, the three of us have to do a little bit.
School board elections generally have pitifully low turnout. Less than 10% often.
You say that, but then actually during COVID, we had massive turnout. We had, because we did mail-in ballots. I think we had 12,000 people vote in that school board election.
Really?
Yeah.
I
so we actually
didn't know it was that high.
That eclipsed the regular election. That's unbelievable. I think it was 8,000 in the regular election.
It was shocking. It was because you could mail in. It was crazy.
But also the school district goes well beyond the city borders.
Yes, it does. So it's Greenfield. It's
Wilton.
Yeah. Greenfield, Wilton. And then it's all the city school districts, city schools as well. But I'm embarrassed to say I don't know whose term is up. I don't know who's running again.
I've got the 4 names of the candidates.
Oh, good.
Do you want me to read them? Sharon Dominguez, who we just mentioned, who's the one, I believe she's the one non-incumbent, I believe. I believe the other 3 candidates, Tony Crackler, who is the chair? Is he president? Anjanette Emeka, I hope I'm saying that right. And Beth Braxton, the 3 additional candidates in addition to Sharon. And I think there are 3 incumbents, but you guys know a little more about that than I do.
Beth is new. I have not heard her name before. She's not an incumbent.
Yeah.
What was her last name?
Braxton.
Beth Braxton. Okay.
We should follow up next week and do a little more in depth in this, or two weeks from now, perhaps.
So I wonder who's coming off then, off of the school board.
We need Ben here.
I know. All right. We'll educate ourselves on this and give you a full scope of the whole picture next week, because again, I'm embarrassed to say I don't know whose term is up that is creating these who's not coming back, I guess, who's choosing not to run again. But we will find out and let you know next week.
Yes. Maybe we can have, I don't know, what do you think, inviting all 4 candidates for separately 5-10 minutes with us over the next 3 weeks?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've been watching the school board meetings and they've been really interesting. They just did a whole thing about vaping that was interesting. And also, I think the thing that is probably the most controversial with this election is that, as you know, they just passed and approved more SROs for the elementary schools. But that was only by one vote that happened. And so if the balance of the school board shifts by one person, they could pull those SROs back. They could vote to remove them by next year, which I think would be a real bummer, honestly. So, yeah, it would. And I will say, I know this is just totally anecdotal, but I've been volunteering at Maple Avenue School every Thursday doing their Blue Streak Buck store for the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. So I'm there for like 3 hours and I see a ton of kids. And one of the things you can get at the Blue Streak Buck store, where you turn in your Blue Streak Bucks, the most expensive thing you can get for 150 Blue Streak Bucks, you can have lunch with the deputy, who's the SRO. And like just 2 weeks ago, right before break, we probably had half a dozen kids turn in all their Blue Streak Bucks to have lunch with the SRO. And I just thought it just like really warmed my heart. And seeing the deputies there engage with the kids has just been really, really awesome to see in person. I've been really impressed with the way I'm seeing them engage and the way I'm seeing the SROs in action in the middle school, which is something I've not been able to see prior to that. So it's been really encouraging.
Yeah, I asked my son who's in the middle school about the SROs and his reactions. He's like, yeah, I saw one today. I had my Yankees hat on, and he asked me how the Yankees were doing, and it was just it's just a friendly neat conversation. And I think SROs, for me, are the number one item on this ballot for coming up for school board. And as far as I know, there's only one candidate, and that's Sharon Dominguez, who supports SROs. I know the two incumbents have actually voted against having SROs in the schools, right, like you said, Robin. So this is a very, very critical election for school board coming up.
And for those of you that disagree with us, we all happen to agree on the SRO issue. But if you disagree with us, we'd consider having you on. You're right into it. We're not going to shut out dissension here. We'd like to have some different opinions here, even if we disagree with them.
What I think would be really nice is if we could have SROs in our schools for a year or two and actually gather some data, because we're always talking about data about SROs, whether it's pro or against, but none of it has to do with our school district and what our experience is in our school district. So wouldn't it be nice if we could actually have SROs in place for a couple of years so we could actually have that data and see how they're actually affecting our schools and our students?
Yeah, it's a great question. And my understanding is that the school board has voted against polling teachers about SROs. Oh, let's table this conversation. We're pushing on an hour. This is very important things for any parent in Saratoga. We'll have a more in-depth conversation, but I do believe that this is something that they the school board, and this school board, you've seen them do things like this before. Well, let's table it. We'll come back. How about that? Okay. You guys just want to jump into Cheers and Jeers?
Yeah, let's jump into our Cheers and Jeers. Who's up first, kids?
I've got some ready. If you want me to start.
Start. Go for it.
Okay, I've got a couple quick cheers. We already talked about, so I'll rat-a-tat hit them out. A cheer to a functional city council meeting last evening, even if there were some blips with the room and so forth. A cheer to the art of compromise, namely the no-knock warrant issue. And a cheer to Jim Montanino doing a proper arrest method, or the most appropriate arrest method, I guess would be a better way to say it this time. So 3 quick cheers. A jeer. Okay, you mentioned the track, Robin. I was able to, I'm happy about this. I was able to get 6 tickets to the Turf Terrace on Alabama Day. Okay, wow. Now for my seats at the Turf Terrace, before I buy a morsel of food, before I lay a single bet, and so forth, how much do you think those 6 seats cost me out of pocket to get those 6 seats before I buy food, before I lay bets, before I buy anything else? Just those chairs.
$100.
Adam, what's your guess?
The way you're saying it, I'm going to guess 300.
400 for what? 6 seats. This is going to be $1,000 day for me by the time, we buy the food. That's not cheap, a few drinks and so forth. And I don't want to complain too much because I'm happy to be able to have such access, but that is insane. These seats were free not too many years back. They were free. You didn't pay a nickel for them. And I'm paying, basically 70, what was that? Almost $70 a piece for them.
Wait, I assume, by the way, you're taking Adam and I, right?
Yeah.
Hey, if you're paying your own way for the food and drink, I might have to.
Well, yeah, I did Diet Coke.
We'll go live from the track.
Yeah, that's a lot. Man,
we should do that someday, some morning.
Yeah, in the $400 seats. I'm all about it.
So that's my jeer. That's my jeer. And I don't want to complain too much because it's sure a first world problem, isn't it? I'm fortunate that I'm able to go to the track. We're all fortunate we have the track here and we're able to go to it. So I don't want to whine too much, but I had to get it off my chest.
Well, listen, I have a quick 2 cheers if I can get right into them. My first cheer is that marijuana delivery to begin in the capital region on 4/20. What?
That's like tomorrow.
That's the company is called Legacy Dispensary will launch legal cannabis delivery to the capital region on April 20th. I saw this on Instagram. It's on 2 Buttons Deep Instagram page. And for those who participate in smoking some marijuana and are lazy, that's kind of exciting for those people. Maybe those people are me. I don't know. And then my other cheer is actually for Kristen Dart, because I just thought her public comment last night was just incredibly moving. And so I just wanted to cheer her as well. And I'm going to skip my cheer for the week.
Sure.
All right. I have 2 jeers. So my first year, it comes from Fox News. And I know this is national, but I like to dump in here every now and again. And the settlement with Dominion. Essentially, this is a $750 million or thereabout settlement with Dominion for lying and spreading fake election news. Essentially, makes Fox News a propaganda outlet, which everybody knows they were. And I understand Dominion is not there to right Fox's wrong. They're there to be made whole financially. I understood why they settled. I was kind of looking forward to, having the Fox, all the personalities and the executive leadership having to go into court and that spectacle. But it's a really appalling thing with our national news, the way it's set up, because it is, and MSNBC is the same way. They haven't been found guilty of anything yet. But Fox News didn't acknowledge this. They don't have to offer any apologies. In their statement, they talked about having high, journalistic integrity, which is just crap. So, for me, I understand why Dominion settled. I wish they wouldn't have. I wish they would have pressed this and held Fox even more accountable for what they do. But I understand, again, they're not there to correct Fox. They're there to make financial whole.
But, Adam, the one good thing about that, the silver lining, was that they were stupid enough, Fox was stupid enough to go through all the depositions before settling. I mean, so that we know Tucker Carlson hates Donald Trump. We have all that stuff. They didn't have to do that. They could have just settled and not had all their dirty laundry exposed. So at least we got that.
That's true, but unfortunately, that just doesn't. The people,
I know.
There's no reach to people, who are in their own echo chamber.
I know.
So,
I totally agree.
Again, this spreading of false or information and news to push your political agenda, I think is horrible. And so my next year goes to one of the candidates for supervisor, Gordon Boyd, who did this in a different way. He did, a Facebook post essentially applying that some candidates who weren't on his team were racist through their, they said the atmosphere of racism, I'm paraphrasing here, is set by adults at every level, from Trump on down to local apologists. My hope is that electors will vote the real Democrats in who aren't racist, implying that people like Sharon Dominguez, who is, she's of Native American descent. Her husband is from Venezuela. She's probably the most diverse candidate. But to throw around these race, to imply that there's racism there, that she's racist, or that Chris Matthiessen is racist, or Michelle Madigan is, or Michelle Madigan, who's a candidate for
not
supervisor.
Democrats running against a Democrat.
It really does a detriment to people in the fight against racism to just so haphazardly throw these kind of accusations around. So, in one other thing, he goes on to say how
where is this post, by the way, Adam? I just want to read it.
Facebook.
I mean, where on his page or on what's going on?
Yeah, on his page, and
Okay.
he talks about how Ron Kim is the first Asian American born mayor, which is great. But Robin Dalton, the first female, commissioner of public safety, Gordon Boyd, that his identity politics didn't matter when it didn't fit what he wanted. And so it's really a shame, and I think it's not doing this city a service to keep these to so loosely throw around or implications of racism. So that's my little rant on what as a society how we can start to bridge the gap is get rid of this crap.
I'm with you on that one, Adam, and I just thought like the purity test that he's trying to put in place for being like a real Democrat. He's just making it harder and harder and harder. And if you don't pass the purity test, you're apparently a racist. And then I also just have to say that in conjunction with the other news I saw him announce, which was, I think, a proposal for a law that would make it illegal to be carrying a firearm, like if you were drunk, which I'm 99% sure is already a state law. I just thought was so... I don't know. I just thought it was completely ridiculous. And he was trying to tie it back to the shootings in November, the shootout in November, as if it wouldn't have happened if those guys knew that there was a local law that said you shouldn't be handling a firearm if you were intoxicated. I mean, like, really? Really?
Well.
Real quick, and you mentioned all that, Adam, and I want to mention Matt Veach, who I think is a reasonable, decent person. He's not racist. He's one of Gordon's opponents in this. So we mentioned Michelle. I want to mention Matt as well.
Yeah, yes.
That's unfair to Matt. That's unfair to Matt.
You're right. Matt is he's been in that position for how long? A while now, and he's running again too. And the way we talked about this is the way two of those three people are going to get voted on to be our representative to the county. So we will see. But I think that's a wrap, guys.
Yeah,
yes, it is.
Excellent.
Thanks for watching, folks. Thank you.
All right, we'll see you next Wednesday.
Stay charming, Saratoga.